Good morning and welcome to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. My name is Bill Benson. I am the host of the museum's public program, First Person. Thank you for joining us today. We are in our 18th year of the First Person program, and our first person today is Mr. Freddie Traum, whom you shall meet shortly. This 2017 season of First Person is made possible by the generosity of the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation with additional funding from the Arlene and Daniel Fisher Foundation. We are grateful for their sponsorship. First Person is a series of conversations with survivors of the Holocaust who share with us their firsthand accounts of their experience during the Holocaust. Each of our First Person guests serves as a volunteer here at this museum. Our 2017 program ends tomorrow. The museum's website at www.ushmm.org provides information about each of our First Person guests. Freddie will share with us his first-person account of his experience during the Holocaust and as a survivor for about 45 minutes. If we have time at the end of our program for questions from you, we'll take them at that time. The life stories of Holocaust survivors transcend the decades. What you are about to hear from Freddie is one individual's account of the Holocaust. We have prepared a brief slide presentation to help with his introduction, and we begin with this photo of Alfred, or Freddie Traum. Freddie was born in March 1929 in Vienna, Austria. On this map of Europe, our arrow points to Austria, and on this map of Austria, the arrow points to Vienna. Freddie had one sister. His mother and father owned a business, and pictured here, we see Freddie, who is on the bicycle, and his cousin Joseph in 1938. On March 12, 1938, German troops invaded Austria. After Freddie's parents learned about the Kindertransport, a rescue effort which brought thousands of refugee Jewish children to Great Britain between 1938 and 1940, they decided to send their two children to England. In 1939, Freddie and his sister Ruth went to live with a family in London. This photo was taken on the afternoon of Freddie and Ruth's departure for London. Pictured from left to right are Ruth, Freddie's grandmother, his father Freddie, and his mother. And here we see Freddie's passport that he used on his journey to England. When England declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, the Traum children and thousands of others were sent to live in the English countryside. Freddie spent the next 3 years of his life there. Here we see 12-year-old Freddie and his sister Ruth at an evacuation residence near Luton, England. After the war, Freddie became a merchant seaman and eventually moved to Israel. He met his wife Josiane on an Israeli ship upon which they would be married. We close with this photo from Josie and Freddie's wedding aboard the Israeli passenger liner SS Zion in 1958. After the birth of Freddie and Josie's first child, he gave up his career as a merchant seaman and went to work for IBM in Israel. Their daughter Yael was also born in Israel. Upon the advice of Israeli medical experts, Freddie and Josie relocated to the United States in 1963 to obtain medical care for their son Michael, who is disabled. Freddie was able to transfer to IBM in New Jersey and to begin their new life here. Their third child, son Jonathan, who is also disabled, was born here. Eventually, Freddie went to work for Boeing as an engineer in telecommunications, and they moved to Silver Spring, Maryland, where Freddie and Josie live today. Freddie is accompanied today by Josie, as well as his daughter, Yael, and their grandson, Isaac, who are all here in the front row with us. Freddie is retired from Boeing. Josie retired 9 years ago as a clinical social worker for abused children with Child Protective Services in Montgomery County, Maryland. Josie and her mother, Fanny Eisenberg, are both Holocaust survivors as well. They were both first-person guests earlier this year. For many years, Freddie chaired the local Kindertransport Association, which is made up of fellow survivors of Nazi persecution. He volunteers here at the museum on Tuesdays as a researcher with the International Tracing Service Archive. He has also served as a tour guide for the museum's special exhibitions, including the recent exhibition on Nazi propaganda entitled State of Deception, The Power of Propaganda, as well as the 2008 exhibition about the 1936 Nazi Olympics. Freddie also speaks about his experience as a survivor on behalf of the museum at various colleges and federal and other governmental agencies, such as the Federal Housing Authority, King College in Tennessee, Milligan College in Virginia, Black River Technical College in Pocahontas, Arkansas, and Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida, as well as the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. Freddie is a contributor to the museum's publication, Echoes of Memory, which features writings by survivors who participate in the museum's writing class for survivors. After today's program, Freddie will be available to sign copies of Echoes of Memory, which is also available through the museum's bookstore. And with that, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our first person, Mr. Freddie Traum. You have so much to share with us in a short time, so we'll get started right away if that's okay, Freddie. You told me that you had a happy childhood. Let's begin with you telling us about your childhood and what you know about your parents' life in the years before the war and the Holocaust.
Well, there weren't that many years to talk about. My childhood in Vienna was happy. We lived in a suburb, very few Jewish people there. Most of the kids that I played with were not Jewish. And I used to get along with everybody well. Well, he was crippled. He could only get around with the aid of 2 cranes, and rarely left the house. So when I came home from school, he was always there, mostly prepared lunch for me. And I actually enjoyed my time with him because he was very creative. He could teach me many things. Above all, he taught me that you can do anything you want. You just have to have the confidence. And it kind of carried me through life in doing all kinds of crazy things, but I did them. Before the days of credit cards, people had to pay cash on a nail if you want something. There's no way to be able to get hold of something otherwise. So therefore there was a business, and my parents did that, where we had catalogs. People would come and go through the catalogs, choose something. It could be anything from tablecloth, radio, or bicycle. And we would buy it, and then they would pay time on it, every month.
Like an installment basis?
And I guess the difference between wholesale that we bought it and what they paid, that was our living.
So, and your mother and father did that together,
yeah.
Right? And one of the reasons during that time she was already well into school, right?
Yeah, she had started high school in Vienna.
Were your parents Austrian citizens?
No, they were born in Poland. At the time when they were born, that part of Poland actually belonged to Austria, part of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And so, he was inducted into the army. He could go anywhere he wanted, and they decided they wanted to go to Vienna. But in 1938, I think it was, Poland decided if anybody was away from the country for more than 5 years, they would lose their citizenship. And so my parents became stateless.
So stateless meaning they had no country, no nationality.
Yeah, you couldn't have any passport, and therefore it prevented a lot of people from going anywhere. My passport actually says stateless on it.
Right on the passport,
Yeah.
stateless. What do you remember of that, and what can you tell us about what your parents were experiencing in the time that led up to the Anschluss, the German annexation of Austria in early 1938, and then later in 1938, Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass? What was that time like for your parents, as best you know?
Well, when the Germans marched in to Vienna, I think it was in March of 1938, there was a great deal of excitement among the kids and the people we knew there, because they were all pro-Nazis, and planes would come overhead and drop clouds of little swastikas, and kids, and I was with them, go around and look for them and pick them out. And at first it was a lot of fun, so it seemed. And gradually they were indoctrinated and against Jewish people. So little by little, they distanced themselves from me. First of all, they were very busy, and at first it was just not having time to play with me and that sort of thing. Afterwards, it became very different. They started name calling and sometimes even physical attacks. So it didn't take long for that whole Nazi kind of environment to
You had described it to me as, besides, picking up the swastikas dropped from a plane, that, the kids would put on uniforms and they'd have knives and insignia.
That's right.
So it was all, they were proud of all this, and
Yeah.
then it turned so ominous.
That's right. At first, I was a little jealous. They seemed to be having a great time, and I was excluded. But afterwards, it wasn't that at all. It was nastiness about it.
You had an incident, a satchel was ripped away from
Yeah,
you.
I was still going to the regular school then, and I used to always walk home with a bunch of kids that lived close by. And some kids came by, they ripped off my school satchel and threw it on the glass and went running off. And so I stepped over the little railing and to retrieve it. And no sooner did I do that, and the policeman was there, he caught me by the scruff of the neck and said, "The trouble with you Jewish boys, you have no respect for the beauty of Vienna." And he must have been there and seen what was happening, but that didn't make it.
But so you had walked on the grass to retrieve
Yeah,
your satchel,
it's-
and that's what he went after you for.
In Vienna, from what I remember, all these parks were you were not allowed to tread on them. They were just to be looked at. A big difference to England, where if it's even outside the palace, people laying down the grass and having sandwiches and all that. But in Vienna was very different.
Were you able to continue your schooling at that time?
No, I had to find another school. Actually, there were certain schools which were for Jews, and I was sent to one of those schools. It was much further from my home. I had to take a tram to get there, but it was much more pleasant. I was in an environment which was friendly. The teacher was friendly and all that.
In fact, you became a member of the Jewish Boys Choir, right?
Well, that was from a synagogue.
Okay.
And
This was a serious choir.
oh yeah, they consider themselves the Jewish part of the Vienna Boys Choir, which is very famous. And after Kristallnacht, the synagogue that I used to go to was torched and burned to the ground. Then they formed a choir in actually it was a Jewish section of Vienna. And I applied and I was accepted there. So I had to go twice a week for choir practice, which was actually quite a big thing because I was a little boy of 8 years old. I had to go with a tram or underground to this place and then come back at night. I don't think people feel free to send a little 8-year-old kids into DC, for example.
On the metro, yeah, by themselves. I don't think so. Yeah.
But it's strange. In this respect, there was a certain freedom for kids had that you don't have now because there are too many weirdos around or so.
Freddie, during that time,
Well, what happened was that people, once it was kind of known that you don't buy from Jews, then the ones who had bought felt that there was no reason that they have to pay back. And so we didn't have any stock at home. It was all out with the people. And so we couldn't go to collect because people would just laugh at me and not pay. And everything we had was out amongst the people. So it pretty much ruined my people.
Ruined his business. Yeah. You told me about a memory that you actually recently recalled in which you were at home and you drew a picture of a Nazi in his brown shirt, and that really upset your parents.
Yeah. It's something that could have gotten them killed. I must have heard somebody mention it. The brown pest. And so I drew a guy in the brown uniform, and I put that caption underneath. Mm-hmm. And when they saw that, they got very upset because who knows where else I might do something like that. Mm-hmm. So they grabbed it from me and put it in the fire. Mm-hmm. And told me in no uncertain ways that never to do something like that. Mm-hmm. A person could get killed.
And then, of course, early November 1938, Kristallnacht, as you mentioned, your synagogue was burned, as were hundreds in Germany and Austria and other places. It wasn't long after Kristallnacht that your parents made a really profound decision to send you and Ruth, your sister, to England on a Kindertransport. Tell us, if you can, what it was like for them and what was involved in making that decision, and then tell us about leaving them.
My father tried to make it like an adventure for me. Mm-hmm. We knew who we were going to, and that person, he was an engine driver, one of those locomotives.
In England, you knew that. In England, you knew who you were going to.
And we knew he had 2 children, a boy and a girl, similar in age to us. And I knew that the boy had a little bicycle. That was a big thing for me. Mm-hmm. So I thought, he'll let me ride it once in a while. And so my dad did his best to make the whole journey and effort of going there as an adventure.
As an adventure.
And not a sad kind of parting. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way I left. Mm-hmm. Of course, I didn't know that this would be forever. I thought we'd be reunited soon after, but that's not how things happened.
But you expected that they would come later, or you would go back, right? Yeah. The Kindertransport England England was one of the few places of refuge, and they agreed to take in, I believe, 10,000.
No, they agreed. It was there was no cap on
No
that.
cap on it, okay.
The 10,000 happened to be the number when war started.
Okay.
If the war would have started 6 months later, it could
It
have
would
been
more.
12,000.
Okay. But as it turned out, as you said, 10,000,
Yeah.
including you and your sister. What do your father to the train station and then going to England from there?
When we were at the train station, the window was open and my mother was on the other side, and we were kind of holding hands and didn't really know what to say to each other. Then all of a sudden my school teacher appeared in front of me. He had his son on his arm, about a 5-year-old boy. And he knew that I was going on this, and he'd managed to get his son accepted on the Kindertransport. So he passed him through the window and asked if he could sit with us, if I could keep an eye on him until we arrive in London, where somebody will come and pick him up. So I said, okay, of course. And all of a sudden I felt a new responsibility on me to help this little kid.
You're 8 years old, and this little child is given to you, taken to
Yeah.
England with you. Yeah.
And that's what, I mean, I didn't think of what it was like for the father to just pass him through the window, and that's it. But that's how it happened.
One of the things you shared with me, Freddie, was that it may have helped make the decision a little easier for your parents because other children had left, including you had cousins that left for Palestine, so people had been leaving, at least a few up until that point that your family knew.
Well, I think 4 or 5 of my cousins went to Palestine. They were older, and there was a special youth program that they could get.
Yep.
Now, my sister was old enough for that, but I wasn't. And my parents didn't want to separate them. So she had to come with me, much to her dismay. But
We saw when we were looking at the slideshow, the pictures, there was a picture of you with your parents, your grandmother, your sister. That's a particularly significant photograph. Tell us about that photograph.
yeah, my dad, amongst other things, was an amateur photographer.
Mm-hmm.
So he had us all go downstairs to the back, in the backyard there, and he took the pictures, and then took one on the delayed shutter, so he could sit down with us, and that's how he happens to be on the photograph too.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after we arrived in England, we received a picture. Now, he'd written on the negative there in German, the Abschied, meaning the farewell. And it happened the same day we left there.
Mm-hmm. And obviously the last photo of you
Yeah.
all together. Did your parents try to leave Austria?
I don't know what they actually tried, but they had little chance. Number one, my father was crippled. Secondly, they didn't speak English. And, to come to England without speaking the language for an adult would have been almost impossible. There were people who came and they went into service and, could become a gardener or whatever. But the fact is, their circumstances were such that they had no chance.
So June 1939, you and Ruth, and the little child handed to you evidently, you arrived in London, and you knew you were going to go to the Griggs family. What happened once you arrived in London?
Well, somebody came to pick us up. Actually, it was a person who was a colleague of my father. They worked together sometime, and he was in England. So he came and picked us up and took us to the Griggs home. And that was the last we saw of him. The Griggs, they had two children, a daughter and a son. They were close age to us, about a year difference. And it was very different to our home. There during lunch, dinner time, you don't have a free-for-all where everybody's talking, and you're supposed to be quiet and eat. And then when you get up, you have to say, "May I leave the table, please?" It was a real old-fashioned English type. But soon got acclimatized to all those ways.
You just happened to know who you were going to.
No,
Yeah.
you know what happened? The ex-British Prime Minister, Earl Baden, I think he made an appeal on the radio for people to open their hearts and open the doors and take in children. He made quite an impassioned appeal. And the family I went to answered this appeal. And because of that, I'm able to be here. Of course, not everybody went to a home. Some kids went to hostels and all kinds of places where they could be accommodated. But in our case, we knew where we were going.
You told us a moment ago that you received that photograph after you got to London. Were you able to have contact with your parents, at least for a while?
In the beginning, until the war started, then it was very difficult. We did have a cousin in Switzerland, and they sent a letter to us via him in Switzerland. But it wasn't long after, about 1941, all communication stopped. At first, we had lots of letters. They must have been writing every day.
Every day. Did you and Ruth start going to school when you arrived?
They registered me the following Monday. And so I turned up in this school and was not speaking a word of English. I knew two words, yes and no, or something like that. And during playtime, a kid came up to me and said something. I thought he wanted to play. So I said, yes. Next thing he punched me. He asked me, "Do you want to fight?" So I used my one word.
You had a 50-50 chance on that one, yeah.
I very quickly learned that I've got a little more than this one word. And it's amazing, the language came to me very quickly. By September 1 is when the kids were evacuated to the country. That's the date the Germans marched into Poland. And so I was evacuated with my class.
And this was January 1, 1939. So
Yeah.
you'd been with the Griggs about a year.
Yeah,
Okay, so September 1, 1939, you're evacuated.
yeah. And by that time, I felt very comfortable with English.
In that one
Now,
year.
I'm sure my vocabulary was limited, and maybe my accent was bad also, but at that time, at that age, it's easy to pick up another language. And after a short while, I was forgetting my German.
Freddie, you spent a little more than a year with the Griggs at that point, and generally it sounded like you adjusted to their lifestyle, but that was an okay place. But now you have to leave London because of the evacuation. Tell us about that and where you ended up going.
Well, Britain was very organized as far as evacuating the kids. we came to, it's an estate, they call it. I guess we'd call it a development here. All the houses were the same. And a woman from the Women Voluntary Service met us, walked up the street, and she knew who was in every house, how many rooms, how many people. So she stopped at this one house, and she said that she asked if they could take in evacuees or a family from London. They didn't want anything. And then she said, well, I have 2 evacuees here. They happen to be Jewish refugees as well. And so this woman said, oh, I don't much care for Jews. And they said, well, if you don't want them, maybe we'll have a couple of soldiers billeted here. When she heard that and thought about soldiers with their hobnail boots walking around in her house, she said, no, I'll take the kids. And it didn't make a happy landing there. She was the way she was. And I had to be out of the house every day, all the time, except when it was time to eat or time to sleep. So I spent a lot of time sheltering in doorways of those in the shopping centre out of the rain. I was there for 3.5 years.
And essentially allowed in the house at mealtime.
But I happened to meet up with a farm when I was helping a potato picking crop, and they were wonderful. And so I used to go as whenever I could help out on a farm, and they'd invite me in for Christmas dinner, and it was a nice relationship.
And this was a small town out in the country, right?
Yeah, it was more of a village.
More of a village.
And most people were very nice. And if I would have told my headmaster at school that about the way I was in this house, they would have had me out of there immediately and got me another.
But you never said a word?
No, I just didn't think I could complain. And I managed to make do with it. And I had a lot of friends amongst the kids.
Yeah.
So.
Was your sister Ruth with you? Where was your sister Ruth?
She went back to London because Mrs. Griggs died in the beginning of the war. Oh. So she, at an early age, became the older sister in the house and had to keep house. So she didn't have it easy.
Did you have contact with the Griggs in London during those 3 years you were out in the countryside? Did you have contact with the Griggs while you were living with the Clissolds for those reasons? No.
Nobody had phones, and we didn't write letters and all that. No.
I think you were, if I'm correct, you were close to 14 when you left the Clissolds and returned to London. Tell us why you went back to London and what you did once you got there.
In those days, it sounds like I'm talking about the Middle Ages, but at that time, school leaving age was 14. Unless you were in some program, high school, and these things were all private. So I came, and you didn't leave the end of the school year. My birthday was in March, so March, off you go.
That's it, the end of your schooling, and off you go. It. Okay.
And so I came home, came to London, and there was Mr. Griggs and his brother deep in discussion what I should do about getting a job. They were both staunch union people. So I should look for a job with a good union. I think they could already see me going on strike.
And again, you're 14 years
Yeah.
old, yeah.
So anyway, his brother said, well, newspapers are good company, good thing, because no matter what the situation is, people always have to read the newspapers. So I took that as a good advice. The following morning, I went into London, Fleet Street. If anybody here knows it, that's like the news capital of the world there. Every major newspaper has some representative there. So I walked into Fleet Street, walked down, and there was a big building, the Daily Telegraph. And it had picture windows there, so I stopped there to look at the photographs that had been appeared in the newspapers. And a few minutes later, a boy came and stood next to me, and he was wearing one of these page boy outfits, and with a pillbox on the hat there on the side, and I could just read Telegraph there. So I said to him, "What's it like working for the Telegraph?" "Oh, it's a great company. Are you looking for work?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, the head office is not here. Come with me. 64 Cannon Street." I said, "Okay." Fell into step with him, and we went off to Cannon Street. And when we got there was again a big brass plaque on the side of the door, a lot of writing, but I wrote at the bottom, it said Telegraph. So we went in, he showed me a place to sit down and wait, and I did. Pretty soon a guy came and he said, "I understand you're looking for work." So I said, "Yes."
This is actually one of my favorite stories from Freddie, but it's very involved, so we're going to short-circuit it a little bit. Freddie thinks this young boy is with the Daily Telegraph, a major newspaper, and so he goes with him and ends up moving out to the country to a little printing plant, thinking he's working for the newspaper, and they print telegraph forms. And there he goes to work, but learns everything about printing and stays with him until the war ends, right?
I arrived there, and the company took care of having us billeted with different people in the village there, and they provided some meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there was a big barn there, and they sent me across there to see Mr. Carter. He's the manager. So I walked in, and he showed me all these small printing machines working, chucking away for all they were worth. And he showed me what was going on, and I couldn't wait anymore. I said, "Where do they bring the newspapers?" He said, "What newspapers?" I said, "The Daily Telegraph, of course." He laughed. He said, "This is not the Daily Telegraph. This is the Exchange Telegraph." He said, "We're also in the news business, but we get the news of companies as it managed coming over on the ticker tape, and we prepared a document of the financial status." And
You'd gone in there looking for the big newspaper printing presses, and they were just little things chugging along, like you said.
But actually, this was much better because I was a boy and young, and all the boys that when they're each 18, they get called up. So they put me through different sections, so the next guy that gets called up, I can go and do his work. And I learned how to use, these were American machines, multi-lift machines. God, I can't even think of the word, but it was a useful useful trade to learn.
And especially later you would go into the
Yeah.
computer industry and IBM and all of that.
It was lithographic.
Lithographic machines. Freddie, you were 16 when the war ended in May of 1945. What did you and Ruth do then?
Well, at first, the company I worked with moved back to London, so I moved back with them. But Mr. Griggs retired when he was 65, and it was just about that same time.
Mm-hmm.
And he became violently very sick and died. It's amazing, all the years during the war, he stood on the footplate of the engine and was shaking around and everything, and he managed to do his work and stay healthy. Mm-hmm. As soon as he left that, it seemed like his body couldn't take the change, and he became violently sick. So he died, and his 2 children were going to stay with a family member. And my sister and I were kind of out in the cold, had to find some place. And through some contact that my sister had, we found some people in Manchester that would help us. Mm-hmm. So we moved to Manchester, and that was my first time I came across Jewish people in England.
So where you were with the Clissolds or the...
In London, I didn't know anybody, so I didn't have any normal contact with Jewish people. In Manchester, I did, and I joined some of the clubs there. Mm-hmm. And so actually I've enjoyed my time there very much.
You mentioned earlier to us that your passport actually said you were stateless, you had no nationality. You were able to get British citizenship.
Yeah, because after the war ended, Britain realized that they had thousands of kids, or young adults now, who had no nationality. And so they offered them. All we had to do was go down to an office and sign, and that was it. You were a British citizen. Mm-hmm. And it meant that they could get a passport, they could travel. In the case of boys, it meant that when they're 18, they would have the obligation of military service, but something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, you got drafted.
Yeah.
So what happened? You got drafted.
That was a strange thing, I see. I went and had my medical, and I passed out A1. They said, go home, in due course we'll call you. Meanwhile, the state of Israel was declared, and immediately Israel was attacked by 5 neighboring countries. And so I thought, this is crazy for me to go in the British Army. I should really be going in the Israeli Army. And there was some kind of recruiting that was going on there. And so I finished up going into the Israeli Army. They kept coming to my sister, because I'd been living with her, looking for me. So finally she told them I was in Israel. So they left her alone. But so I was in the Israeli army for about a year and a half. But I knew that I had to go back to England.
Before you go to that, you told me when you were in the Israeli army, you told me an amazing story about encountering a cousin. Will you share that?
I was with a bunch of Moroccan Jews, and they were all speaking Arabic all the time. And I couldn't speak English to anybody. I felt really alone there. And I came out from the mess hall, and there was a guy standing there looking around, and I said, he looks like somebody who could speak English. So I was going to go up to him and ask him if he speaks English. when he looked around and he said, "Freddie?" I said, "Yes." And it was my cousin from Vienna. And he came there to look for me because it gives you some idea how small the country is. Because his sister-in-law worked for the Jewish agency, and when new people arrived, she was going through the list and happened to come across my name, which was the same as his. So she asked, it came that's why he came to see if he could meet me. So I got a few days leave out of that.
So what happened when you got back to England?
Well, there was an office that used to take care of the volunteers. There were volunteers from America, South Africa, and from England that joined the Israeli army. Mm-hmm. And so they had a ticket for me, a flight ticket. And I came out from the office, and I thought, what am I going to do for that? I liked to be in Israel. I felt I should stay there, but I had an obligation to go back in England and do my national service. While I was standing there, a guy came along who I recognized from England. And he told me he was in the Merchant Navy and he was having a great time and all wonderful things. So I thought, this is it. This is it for me, because I don't speak the language, I don't have any money and nowhere to stay. In the Merchant Navy, I'll have a place to stay, I'll have a job. And so I made my mind up very hastily. I went back to England. As I arrived in port there, they looked at papers and the immigration people. You wanted by the army? I said, yes. I said, that's why I'm here. So I said, okay, mind you, go report to the police station as soon as you can. And
so they were literally looking for you because you were supposed to be in the army. Yep.
So I did that. 2 weeks later, I was already reporting at a army camp. And there was a note there for me to report to the adjutant. And he's the guy in charge of discipline in the camp. And I thought I was going to have God knows what thrown at me. And he was very nice. He said, I know what you do and I respect you for what we did. He said, so we're just going to wipe the slate clean and you just do your 2 years like everyone else. And that was it. They were very understanding. Mm-hmm. And this regiment that I went to was one of the last regiments to leave Palestine. And so he knew all about these places and was asking me questions whether this place, the refinery was operating, or what, maybe there was some stock there or so. But it turned out okay.
Yeah, you said actually you enjoyed your experience with the British Army.
Yeah.
So after that, you then you go to the Merchant Navy College and to become a radio officer at sea, and that of course later led to you meeting Josiane and getting married. So tell us a little bit about that next journey, joining the merchant fleet.
It didn't happen at once. It took quite a while because first I was on British ships. Then I went to earn some more money and then I went back for further study. And there were new courses on radar for radio officers. I took those and so that was more marketable. And then I applied to the Israeli shipping line. They sent me to Hamburg where a new passenger ship was being completed. And so I was signed on to that ship. And fortunately, when you came through the Bay of Biscay, which is a very kind of troubled waters place, and the radar broke down. They called me to the bridge. Anyway, I managed to fix it, and the captain was really delighted because here he was bringing a ship home on a maiden voyage through fog and rain in a heavy traveled area and blind as a bat because his radar didn't work. And so when I managed to fix it, he was delighted and then asked me if I would like to stay on the ship. I said, you better would. And so I stayed on that ship for a long time, almost 4 years.
And met your future wife there, right?
Yes, she was a passenger. And a friend of mine introduced us. And we started seeing each other every 5 weeks when the ship was in.
And after you got married for a while, you stayed with the fleet,
Yeah.
and Josie was able to go with you on some of your trips, if I remember right. Yeah.
They had me going on the Caribbean cruises.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said she could come with me and do a few cruises. So she came home to her parents and came on a few cruises with me.
Freddie, moving to another topic for a minute, it wasn't very long ago that you found information in the International Tracing Service about your own family. Will you share that with us?
I was working with Steve Vito, who handles that tracing service here. He asked me to look through a number of documents which were deported to deported of people, and it was going by alphabetical, and I was looking at the list from Vienna. It's really strange because there was a cover letter, not a cover letter, just a cover to it, and that was handwritten. Mm-hmm. It was beautiful scroll handwriting, as if it was a wedding invitation. But all the people afterwards on the typewritten there, they're all being sent to their death. And I went down this alphabetically, and then I found my parents, my uncle, his wife, my cousin, my grandmother, all being deported to East, to Minsk. And it's kind of shocked to see it there in writing. Of course, by this time I already knew that they had not survived the war, so that was not a surprise, but just the cold way of seeing it written, and from the Gestapo sending them off.
And you were able to learn, in fact, how they died as well, right? Yeah. And one of the people you learned about besides your parents, we saw a photograph earlier with you and your cousin, I believe, Joseph, and you found Joseph's name as well in the list.
The parents couldn't part. They had 4 boys. 3 of them went to Palestine. He was the youngest. They couldn't part with him, so he stayed with him, and that was his death sentence.
You told us earlier that for a while you were able to get word from your parents once you were in England. Will you tell us about the last telegram that you got from them?
The last thing wasn't from them. It was from the Red Cross, just 25 words.
25 words.
kind of a goodbye.
And you still have that? No.
I gave everything I had to the museum. Talked to the girl only a couple of days ago. She's older than me, so she's had her troubles. Everybody else has died. And so she's the only family member. And she looks upon me as also a family.
Right. You wrote a book about your seafaring days, about being in the merchant as a merchant seaman. Why haven't you written a book about your Holocaust experience?
Well, that book is when I graduated from the college to when I arrived in New York the first time. So it doesn't go into anything about the Holocaust. The writings that touch on the Holocaust are the writings I did and the memoir of here at the museum.
In your essays that go into the echoes of memory. Will you tell us just a little bit about your sister Ruth? What happened to Ruth?
I'd mentioned that she was keeping house with Mr. Griggs. So in a way, when he died and we moved to Manchester, that was the first time that she actually could blossom up a little bit, the way a person should. She got a job in the office and lunchtime happened to meet up with the guy, David Doniger, who had just discharged from the army. And he was a captain in the army. And they met, and it was a courtship, and pretty soon after they were married. And so they moved to Israel too. And after I was on the Israeli ship, and they had two boys. The youngest son was killed in the 1973 war. He was an officer in an Armored Corps regiment, and he was just 21. The other brother, the older one, he's still there. We see them frequently. Well, every few months, I'll say. And he has two children, and they've all married and have children too. So he's got six grandchildren right close to where he lives.
And your sister passed away in 2000?
In 2000.
2000. My last question before we close up the program is, once the war was over and in the years after that, did you talk about what you went through, and did you and your sister talk about what you went through? And
No.
No.
It's very strange. I mean, we accepted. We went on from there, and people didn't talk about it. When I met Josie, we didn't talk about our common background. People sometimes ask her, is that why you kind of found the person that had somebody similar background? I said, no, not at all. She's a girl and I'm a boy, and that's about as baked as it was. And only later did we find out that there were some similarities in our background. No, it didn't really spend much time talking about it.
Freddie, I think we are probably at the end of our time here, so we're not going to have time for questions. Just to remind you that we end our 2017 program tomorrow. We will resume First Person in March of 2018. The museum's website will have information about our program for 2018. The museum's website also has videos of each of our First Person programs. You can reach them through the museum's website on YouTube, so you get a chance to see other programs as well if you can, and we hope your future travels will bring you back to us. When Freddie finishes in a moment, our photographer Joel is going to come up on the stage here and take a photograph of Freddie with you as the background. So we want you to stay here, and that'll make it's just a nice, very nice reminder for Freddie of his experience being with us and with all of you today. So on that note, Freddie, would you like to close our program?
Yeah. I'd already told you how I happened to come with the great Griggs family, because here was somebody who heard an appeal and took it to heart and did something. And as a result of that, I'm here today. Had they not decided to take us in, I don't know what would have happened. We might have ended up like our parents and so many others. So I think what you do matters is a great slogan. I think it's very deep meaning, and certainly was for us. So I think it's a slogan for the museum as well, that what you do, it matters greatly. And I can't have a better message than that. So thank you all for coming.